Hello, everybody. I've got a very specific kind of thing to talk about today, which I hope will make sense by the end of it. What we do all the time is we use light in the most kind of creative, appropriate way. And sometimes the problem with light and lighting design is there's so many options, there's so much technology available and so many techniques and distractions that sometimes the hardest thing is to kind of edit it all down. And I think we've all seen projects and proposals where there's just too much kind of going on and the choice is too great. So what we spend a lot of time doing in our practice, almost to a fault sometimes, is working to find out what the right light is for the project. And I don't mean the right technology, I don't mean necessarily the right effect. It's to do with finding the essence of what the project's about. So this short talk today is about a few projects where we spent a lot of time kind of working out the right light. I mean, we all know that we are surrounded by light constantly. There's lots of different sources of light, and we don't have control of all of them as lighting designers, certainly not. There's all sorts of aspects of lighting in society that conflict with each other. But it's a reality. You know, if you're working in a kind of public realm project, for example, there are aspects to do with retail lighting and adjacent sites that have light that you have to kind of bear in mind. It's not a kind of perfect world by any means, but we have to kind of acknowledge that this stuff exists around us. And in a sense, what is also kind of fun to think about in terms of lighting is the different types of light that we don't have access so much anymore to this stuff. We're not allowed to use this stuff so much anymore, but it was good. It had different qualities to it. And you can just hear they have a soundtrack to them, these lights, you know, and that's kind of, in many ways, we're kind of lesser for it. Whether it be the kind of, you know, the burning sources or the, you know, or the gases. You know, these things that kind of we're all used to, and they all had a kind of particular kind of character to them. You know, nowadays, you know, what we have is something much more kind of silent, which is, you know, the LED, the silent killer. You know, just it's all the same. It's all the same. And LEDs, in a way, are kind of mimic source. Anyway, in terms of the ideas, just go back on track a second. The right light is by no means about the source. I mean, forget that for a second. It's not about the source that you use. It's about the idea. And in a way, in a kind of creative design studio, you would expect a lot of ideas to be knocking around. But it's very rare that you find the right idea. And it's not just about, you know, brainstorming ideas and coming up with loads and loads of stuff. It actually takes a long time, we've found, to find the right idea. It's a needle in a haystack. I hope you get that. You know, you've got to find it. And once you've found it, you've really got to, you know, and you find it, of course, you know, you've got to listen a lot more than you think. You know, in terms of design, you're like, oh, I've got a great idea, here you go, and you're trying to kind of ram it down people's throat. But actually, you've got to listen a lot with lighting. You've got to listen and understand what the project's about. And you've got to work out whether that's kind of appropriate and whether you feel that you can kind of, you know, augment the project, you know, with light in some way. But once you've found it, you've got to protect it from the wild dogs. You know, you've got to stop, you know, and that's what my kind of talk's about, really. Once you've found the right light for the project, you know it. Maybe you've found a way to express it to a client and the rest of the team, but you've got to really be careful to protect it. I mean, we've had many, many, many good ideas, but sometimes, you know, they go bad. And why do they go bad? They go bad because it turns out the idea wasn't that good after all. That happens quite often. Sometimes budget, the complexity of the idea, the duration of the project, people just get sick to death of it and it kind of dies. You know, what you thought was a kind of, somebody had bought into something kind of disappears during the process. Change a client, change a brief, you know, these things kind of happen to all sorts of projects. And of course, things like poor workmanship and the fact that we are the very last people to be there sometimes kills a good idea. So to actually deliver really good projects and to kind of protect these ideas all the way through is a hell of a task, I tell you, it really is. So in terms of a couple of projects, this is a project which, amongst other things, is about the most simple, logical solution to the problem. I can't tell you who it's for, but you can probably guess. In terms of the hierarchy, let's say, of kind of what's the most important thing in a project, With this particular kind of client, they assume immediately, quite rightly, I suppose, in terms of sales, that it's the product that's the most important thing. But what we wanted to do was flip that around slightly and talk about the legibility of a retail environment before we spoke about the product. Meaning that, in a sense, what you do is you create a kind of a new hierarchy in a retail space. Because in a sense, with all due respect to the product, it sells itself. You know, the retail environments for this kind of client, the product is already sold before people have walked through the door. What people are remembering and understanding is more about the space that they're in. So in order to do that, you have to change the emphasis of what you light first. So what we basically created for them, and you can imagine this was not an easy conversation, was saying, okay, we're not going to light the product as the primary aspect. We're going to make the space look good first, then we're going to light the product, then we're going to make sure people look good, and then we're going to make sure that the ambience and the function of the space kind of works well. So what that means in really simple diagrammatic terms is that you make sure people understand the parameters of the space properly. You light, as it were in this case, the upper floors where there is more retail, and the back staircase, the brightest, so people's eyes are drawn through. Then, of course, you know, the product has to come into play. It's a self-illuminated product after all. Then you make sure people look great, in the kind of the adjacent spaces, so they feel good as they're buying the product, and therefore you make sure that the function and ultimately the ambience is kind of great. So when you kind of play that through, just in a really simple video, that kind of construction of layers of light, if you want to say, results in a really nice balanced composition. Now, of course the product looks great, but the space is understandable. It's an architectural space after all. And it's a really kind of nicely understood space. But, you know, that simple highlight there on the top of a capital, that took us a long time to convince them that that was worth the effort. Another aspect to a different kind of project is when a client is being generous to a city, almost to the benefit of the city rather than to the benefit of their own particular project. And this is a project that we're doing on the waterfront of Hong Kong. And, you know, Hong Kong's a very, very, very dynamic city. And what we wanted to do was make sure that the waterfront edge of this particular project was well recognized from across the water. So it's almost a kind of branding device. But the people that kind of stand on the project, as it were, on this boardwalk, they don't get to see it. It's the people on the other side that get to see it. So in a way, you're kind of giving away the light for free, but by association, you're kind of hopefully attracting kind of people in. So as you stand here, you have no idea about what's happening just over on the other side of the boardwalk. You know, but this is a kind of integrated light that you just get a sense of from the other side of the water. You know, and that then kind of plays out programs and what have you to attract people across the water to your project. And similarly, this is a kind of a bit of a nutty one, is that on the top of that pavilion in position 2 there, there's a video screen on the roof of the pavilion, which obviously from the ground level you can't see. But when you're up on the adjacent kind of, this is a rough video, but when you're on adjacent buildings, you're kind of giving something to the city for free, effectively. You know, it's all attracting people to the project ultimately, but it's a kind of very different way to look at the way you deliver lighting on a project. Is it 6 minutes or is it 8 minutes? Next project. Authenticity is a difficult thing in lighting as well. Artificial light is by its very nature inauthentic. But to try and make artificial light feel authentic, you have to think really kind of hard. This is a project where we were working in the desert or adjacent to a desert. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the way ecology of the desert and the ecology of light in the desert works at night and how the plants kind of behave. And by association, you know, we're taking on aspects of the way, you know, night vision works and trying to enhance that, basically. We're trying to enhance the sense of night vision. So we're actually lighting a project, artificially lighting a project, you know, duping the eye into thinking that it's got a greater range in its kind of, in its night vision. And what that means is using a very low rendering grey light. Now, to produce grey light is actually really hard because, you know, white light is usually kind of trying to be full spectrum, but low color rendering kind of grey light doesn't sound very attractive, but actually it feels very natural to be in. Very feeble moonlight, very feeble grey moonlight. If you can mimic that, it actually feels very natural in some ways. Which means that, you know, the way we then pull out lighting of particular features, this is an underground park, as you do. but the way that you light particular features and the way that plants perform, particularly to different color temperatures of light, is really interesting. So there's not going to be any daffodils on this project, but daffodils, are great in 3,000 Kelvin. But the desert succulents don't look so great in 3,000 Kelvin. But then, of course, if you flip that around, as it were, the kind of desert plants come alive. So we were very, very mindful of a kind of designing a lighting scheme which felt very natural and authentic, for this particular kind of setting, to create a really wonderful environment. And all the time, I don't know if you can see these images, when you're making these wonderful renders, you've got to prove it to yourself. So that brick wall at the back is actually lit with about 16,000 Kelvin white light. And then you just get grey. You stop being blue and you start being grey, and it begins to feel like a form of moonlight, effectively, as the backdrop for this whole thing. Modesty as well is my kind of other one as well. When you hear people like me talking about projects about light, we are always pointing at light sources and what have you. And I think sometimes we have to remember that when you work very closely with other designers, it's not about the light. And you can talk at length about lighting projects, but the best projects actually are when it's more than just lighting or just interior design or just architecture. It's actually when the light and the project and the materials and the ambience and the detailing fits together. Because if I told you how this was lit, it'd be pretty boring. There's downlights, there's pendants, there's a few recessed details, but so what? It's more to do with the way we spent such a lot of time talking to this particular client about the right way that light could reveal the ambience of their space. And I think sometimes when you walk into a successful project, it's not the detailing that your eyes are drawn to, it's just the feel. And this is, in terms of lighting design, I think is one of the most difficult things to do. It's when the project feels right. It's most difficult. And just, balancing out the different kind of materials, fabrics and stuff. This is not about light, this is about light and materials. And when you're kind of, as it were, revealing the materials at this level, it actually feels quite good, So, I suppose the point of this little kind of talk was to, not letting go isn't about being stubborn. It's actually about finding the right kind of atmosphere and quality of light for a project. And once you've found that and you believe that it's absolutely right, our job, is to spend sometimes as long as 10 years protecting that against all the odds, against the budget, against the clients, against the workmen, all these things, just to make sure it's kind of, it's the right light. Thank you.